I'm going to talk about what is solely a restoration project in Kenya, which, as you see up there, it started in the year 2000. And I had a vision that it was going to be a 30-year program, and this is year 15 of a 30-year program. What you see in that picture over there, 10 or 15 years ago was a grass field. So one advantage of working in forest systems in Kenya in the high potential areas is that the trees grow extremely fast. I'm just going to talk about very quickly the threats, the process of restoration, and what we've done. I show this slide first of all because most of you who do not know Africa, when you think of Africa, you think about large game and you think about large wildlife. There are huge threats to wildlife in Africa. Lambs, particularly in the last 30 years or 35 years, have gone down 90%. And most of these animals, whether it's lambs, whether it's elephants, whether it's cheetahs, whatever it is, have disappeared on communal land. So most of the animals left are on protected land or private land. The issue on communal land is that nobody takes care of it. It's a free-for-all. And I'm a great belief, certainly in Kenya in the last 30 years, more and more land has been privatized. And once it is privatized, then there's a vested interest in maintaining the wildlife. There are huge threats of these wildlife mainly because of land conversion. And the same, I think, would also is also in trees. Meanwhile, the number of humans in Kenya, since I was a boy, there were 6 million people. There are now 44 million people. And within 30 or 40 years, it's going to be 100 million. Here's a prime example. If you had been on that site 30 years ago, it would have been full of bush and full of wildlife, and now it is full of animals. And what happens eventually with land degradation, we were talking this morning, if the vegetation has gone, you can get it back. If the soil has gone, and someone else mentioned this morning, you need 10,000 years. If you have a look at this map, most of Kenya, 70% of Kenya is either arid or semi-arid. And in the left-hand corner, you can see the green spots. Those are the high potential areas of Kenya which are high rainfall. If you compare this with the next photograph, just look at those green areas. The next slide is human population. Just look at those green areas, and you see all the people live in high potential areas, which is not surprising, but it means there are huge threats on the high potential areas of Kenya. The system where we are doing restoration is in the high potential areas. We're talking about rainfall of 1,000 to 1,500 millimeters, altitude between 1,500 and 3,000 meters. This area here is part of a national park. It's mostly dominated by bamboo, which is in the foreground, and mountain forest. What's happening, if we just go back a few slides, if we have a look at this large green one on the west side of Kenya, that is called the bout ecosystem, which is a forest of about 400,000 hectares. And in the last 15 years, over 100,000 hectares has been totally cut down and destroyed. There you see more and more encroachment. This is high potential land. There are large numbers of people all wanting farmland, and this forest is gradually disappearing. And that's what so it's short-term gain because you get lots of charcoal, and most people in Kenya depend on charcoal. You obviously get logging and high quality timber. But in the end, you've got long-term loss because these high potential forests are what known as water towers. Kenya is a very dry country like Jordan. It's not as dry as Jordan, but nevertheless it depends upon the water towers. And if you don't have the forests, you get runoff, you get erosion, you get flooding, and you get dry season streams. So the forest cover in Kenya is very, very low. The Kenya forest surface fragments is 7%. They said that last year, because the year before they said it is 1.7%. Because there are 284 ways of describing a forest. But there's very little primary forest left. This is the area where I live and where we have our botanic garden. All of that green, that light green, is tea, which is the main crop in the area, which is about 1,600 or 2,000 meters. In the district in which I live, 99 point, that is wrong, it's not 99.9, it's 99.99% of the native forest has gone in the last 100 years. And all those trees you see, except for a few isolated indigenous trees, are all eucalyptus. For every 4 acres of tea, you must have 1 acre of eucalyptus in order to dry the tea. So they cleared all the forest, it's all gone. This is where our botanic garden is. This is just the convention center, and you'll see already the trees we planted in the last 10 years or so. At the bottom, there are many more trees now than there were in 1990. We use the inner compound simply for rare species, which I'll talk about later. If you look at the eucalyptus forest, that's what you have, everything in straight lines, no undergrowth, very little biodiversity. First thing we did 10 years ago was took down all the eucalyptus trees, and the cypress trees, and the water trees. Then we went to look for seed, which means going over all the mountain areas of Kenya to collect seed. All sorts of, sometimes it's very difficult to get some of these species. The middle one is quite interesting because that is the sole representative genus of the Caricaceae in Africa. The Caricaceae is a South American family from which pawpaws come from. But the pawpaw family originated in Madagascar at the time when Madagascar was stuck to Africa. They then moved across to Gabon, and they left a few traces of genetic material behind, and in the middle you have the seed with the Sandicormorpha, which I collected, and I'll show you in a moment. So once we've got the seed, we then have a tree nursery, and we've now planted about 80,000 indigenous trees, 450 species of woody species, and about 1,000 species of herbaceous material and other things that we've actually got on our accessions list. Then we have to clear the bush, we dig the holes, we plant the trees. That's the young forest. I've got plenty of photographs of how it develops. As you can see, this is the same area after 2 years. This is a project we started 2 years ago in collaboration with the Millennium Seed Bank. They funded us for 1 year, but unfortunately the Millennium Seed Bank, being part of Q, started running out of money, and we don't have the money for that. But what we're doing there is we are measuring which species do well, which species don't do well, how fast they grow, and so forth. So if you look at this photograph, this was an area where we had a cypress plantation. Now the great thing about cypress is that once the cypress has been cut down, there is no regrowth at all, so it is very, very easy to start a forest. In complete contrast, if you try and start a forest where there has been wattle or eucalyptus, you have a real problem. In this photograph here, you can see all these rather tall trees are all wattle, which is acacia neansia, and they regrow in their hundreds of thousands, and it's very, very difficult because they outgrow any indigenous species. This forest here is full of indigenous plants, which you cannot see that they are totally weeded out by invasive species. Similarly with eucalyptus, you can see the damage they do. These sticks are the remains of indigenous trees which we planted amongst what was formerly a eucalyptus forest. Eucalyptus comes up at 3 times the speed and shades out most of the indigenous species. So our main problems are invasive species when we're planting. There we are cutting down wattle, cutting down Prunus and eucalyptus. So after 3 or 4 years, we begin to get a young forest. The survival of any one species can vary between 0% for some species and 99% for other species. So it very much depends on what species we're dealing with. And this is what it looks like after 15 years. That is the exactly same spot. That area is exactly the same spot as that area. So you can see after 15 years, you get quite a remarkable growth. So we are changing the local landscape. As I see, it's a very small project. It's only 40 hectares, but we do have some very, very interesting species indeed. And that is what it looks like in year 15 on most of our forest. All of that on the other side of the valley. That is every single tree we planted ourselves, every single one. We're also very interested in biodiversity. As I say, the forest is more than trees. When we had eucalyptus forests, we had almost nothing. We have so many species of birds now, it is quite unbelievable. We have chameleons, we have snakes, because everyone kills snakes all around us. We collect snakes, we put them in the forest. We don't like some. I mean, I love snakes, but not everybody does. And also, most Africans are terrified of chameleons, am I right? And the chameleons are pretty harmless, but we have several. We have this three-horned chameleon. We have this one here, which is called Brakenhurts chameleon. We have introduced orchids. One interesting thing about it is that if you are trying to enrich a forest, there's often young seeds in the soil which come up, but there were absolutely no indigenous seeds whatsoever in our project. So we've introduced orchids, things like Ceropegias, all sorts of different orchids, and then we have lots of bird species, raptors. We have 11 species of sunbirds. This, believe it or not, is a bird. This is a bird eating a seed, and it's got its tail up, and rather curious. It's called a white. We spend a lot of time educating people that we should also be interested in nitrates, we should be interested in fungi, because it's all part of the forest ecosystem. It's not just a question of seeds. We have 17 species now of mammals, including these bush babies, the galagos, and we have a lot of nocturnal species. We have hedgehogs, we have porcupines, we have bush pigs, we have antelope. Now, if you look at that carefully, this is a colobus monkey. I don't know how many of you know a colobus monkey. It's a very interesting primate because it's the only primate without a thumb. It only has 4 fingers, 2 front and 2 back. If you look carefully, you will not believe me what this animal is going to do. This is a mum, and underneath she's carrying her baby. Now, this is a colobus troop which we had in my own garden, because when I started the forest, the trees were not big enough to host a troop of colobus monkeys, because they like being 15 meters up. What this mum is going to do, she's going to take it to our window on the top floor of our house, and she's going to deposit it, and like any busy mother, she's going to put the baby in front of the television, because that's exactly what it did. There it is. That baby has been watching television with us for the last hour. But that is not the right environment for a colobus, and I'm extremely glad to say that this year, after 15 years, we have now got a resident group of colobus monkeys in our forest. This is the male colobus monkey eating our Sphathidea. So, we have a very small private botanic garden, and it's a struggle. And that's why we are delighted to be part of the Ecological Restoration Alliance, because we've been struggling for 15 years on our own. Nobody's going to take any notice of the 40-hectare project that we hope in the future that we'll be able to get somehow through the Ecological Restoration Alliance. What can we do? Education. The most important thing we can do, I think, is to educate young Kenyans, young Africans about indigenous trees. If you speak to any old man, my age and above, about indigenous trees, he will know the name of it, he will know the name in his own local language, he will know all about its medicinal properties. If you speak to any young Kenyan, especially in the cities, he will know absolutely nothing about indigenous trees. He will not know the difference between an indigenous tree and an exotic. He will not know what is poisonous or what is medicinal. So education. The second thing, I think, at 40 hectares, we do have a modern forest which we can show people that this possibly one day can be upscaled in our forest to 1,000 or 10,000 hectares. And the third thing is that we are part of what's called the Global Trees Campaign, which is just starting. And we have so many rare species of Brakenhurts, some of which have not even been yet identified, because we collect all the remotest areas of Kenya and we propagate them, that we hope we will become a seed source for the rarer trees of Kenya. As I say, if you go into a Nairobi tree nursery, you will get 10 species maximum, or maybe 10 or 15 species. We have 450 species, most of which are unknown. So, number two, my vision is that we are going to become the most important botanic garden in Kenya and possibly East Africa. And number three, what I would like to be able to do in the next 10 years, if I'm still alive, inshallah, is that I would like to get 100 of the most unusual species of Kenya, create 1,000 plants of them, and hand them out to institutions, schools, to individuals. Number 5 down there, removal of invasive plants. That is our number 1 problem. Invasive species are an absolute nightmare. Not just eucalyptus, but also wattle, one called Cestrum aurantiacum from Guatemala, and one for Salam mauritiana. These species take up about 50% of our very small budget. These are some of the species which we planted. They're now much bigger, but every unusual species we have GPS coordinates. We're waiting to see some of them already seeded and fruited, and some are waiting for. Ocotea or sambarensis is an interesting one. This is called the East African camphor. In our area, it is by far the largest tree, and it's been totally extirpated from my area. You will not find it. But an old friend of mine who died about 5 years ago, his father was cutting them down in the 1920s, and they were far bigger than that. I mean, absolutely massive, and they're quite difficult to grow. These are just a few of our unusual species. Practically every single one, we have Kigelia musa, we have in the middle a rubiation called Fleroya. On the top right, we have a very unusual Strychnos inoculo, which is only 2 collections in Kenya. The bottom right is the one that I'm most proud of because it's a climber. There are only, as far as I know, only 5 adult specimens in the whole world. 1 in Mount Kenya, 4 very close to us, and I've planted 100 of them in the last 3 or 4 years. There are only 5 adult specimens in the whole world, as far as we know. We just got it on the IUCN critically endangered red list. The bottom left is also very interesting. That's Xanthosardium aurelia, of which there are only 2 collections, or 3 collections in Kenya from Western Kenya. This is the one that I was asked to collect by Munich, and we now have, I think, about 15 of them. They've never been cultivated in the wild. They've never been cultivated before. It's a huge tree. When I was asked to go, I was told it was pawpaw family. I was expecting to find on the height of this room, like any pawpaw. This one I found on the top right was 50 meters high. So it's a very large tree. You can see me down at the bottom of 2 collectors. Interestingly, ex situ conservation, we have a lot of rare species from the Kenyan coast and other places. This is a very rare one called Gigacyphon, Macrocyphon. And someone said, you'll never grow it at 2,000 meters. It's growing beautifully, it's growing very well. So actually we're quite well placed for ex situ conservation to collect some species from areas which are under threat, like the Eastern Alp Mountains or the coastal forests of Kenya. Sorry. So constraints, invasive species, we've been struggling for 15 years on funding. Fortunately, we're now on the BGCI and they very kindly helped us with it. The important thing is that we have no support from national government. It's not a priority. Loss of biodiversity, reforestation, that is not a priority for Kenya at all, which is very sad. And similarly, we get no support from private or corporate departments. We have no funds. We need a taxonomist desperately. We need a horticulturalist desperately. We need money for infrastructure. We unfortunately have not yet got it. Furthermore, we've been asked to do the same thing in different parts of Kenya. In the rainforest of Western Kenya, the Kakamega forest, we've been offered the land. We've been getting support by the Kenya Forest Service, but so far we haven't got funds. Also, I've been offered land in the Ecological forest and in Ethiopia and in Tanzania. So in theory, we could go to many more places. So our budget down at the bottom, 2015. Last year we had nearly 40,000. This year, or 2013. This year we've got $20,000. To run a botanic garden on $20,000 is quite difficult. We have 15 staff. If you divide 15 into 20,000, it's not much money, and we have almost no money for it. So just have a look at this picture. That's 2,000. All of what you see there is eucalyptus. In the background is one very large tree called Proteria .53 which is about a mouthful. It's called Mulin Kikuyu. That's one of the very few indigenous trees that was still on the compound. The other side of that valley is 100% eucalyptus. and that's what it looks like now. 100% indigenous. On the other side, on this side is government land, there is eucalyptus regrowth, but on the other side it's 100%, except for one cypress I can see up there, one or two cypress. All that forest is indigenous. So thank you very much to BGCI, Ashton, Trust, Arctic Sainsbury's and Chase Africa. I just put this in, this is one of my goals. In clean water, in beautiful air. I just wonder whether her grandchild is going to be able to do that. I hope so, but it depends on us. Thank you very much.